When I joined the military, I kind of fell away from the church as a whole, just because it was hard to go to church the first few years, because I pretty much immediately deployed, and then I was living in Japan with multiple combat deployments during that time frame also, and there was just no availability, and I didn't really have a drive, I guess, then to pursue it. I kind of grew hostile towards religion, if that's a good word for it, just because of my line of work. What brought me closer to God, initially it was the stress of my son. While my wife and I were trying to get pregnant for a long time, and we ended up doing in vitro, and throughout the whole process, it was like one miracle after another, and we had two chances. And basically, the hospital and the doctors up at Seattle Reproductive they're like, we're gonna put them both in there. Basically, 6 weeks later, she had a miscarriage. So we were like, gosh, what's going on here? Because we had to go to the doctor, but they figured out that she was still pregnant. She had a viable pregnancy at 6 weeks, but she had lost one of those two embryos that they implanted in her. And then about 20 weeks of gestation, we found out that he had a lot of issues, a lot of growth restrictions, other health issues going on inside the womb. And at 25 weeks, Brandy was admitted to the hospital on bed rest because the restrictions had gotten so bad. He was only about 21 to 22 weeks of growth at that point. The doctors told us that he had about a 10% chance of survival and a 100% chance of major health issues if they cut him out right now. And we ended up going back to the hospital at the end of that week, which was the night that she was becoming 27 weeks gestation, where they said that his chances would be significantly better at surviving and having a healthy future life. So that night, around midnight, his heart began to stop whenever he was being monitored, and the doctors came rushing in and just swept Brandy off and left me in the room alone, basically, just in the quiet. And I was sitting there for hours before I heard anything. In that time frame, I talked to God constantly. I was losing my mind and just praying and praying and praying, walking down the hall of the chapel and talking to God and begging Him to keep my son alive and keep my wife alive. He answered my prayers that night. And a couple, 3 hours later or so, when they finally came in and told me a status update, they brought a little card in that said, Gavin Robert Bauman, 1 pound 4 ounces, 11 inches, I think, just a little bit bigger than your hand. And they told me that he's having a hard time right now, but they're stabilizing him. Brandy's doing okay. They've got her stable, and you'll be able to see her in about an hour. So I had to sit there another hour. At that point, I knew God had answered my prayers and delivered my son, but he was still having a hard time there trying to get him stable. It was probably a few hours after that before they finally let us go into the NICU to see our son, because they had got him stable. Because he was so tiny at that size, it was a considerable effort to keep him going. And we went in there, and we just, when I walked in there and I saw him, I just felt this extreme rush of God's presence, like overwatching him. And I'm sitting there talking, and he just starts squiggling around. He was completely still until he heard my voice. And I knew that was God signaling me that he had kept my son alive for us and for him, so that he could love him as much as us. Harbor Covenant was actually at the top of my list for churches we were going to go to once I gin up the courage, I guess, to find a church and to actually walk inside it. Whenever I come into Harbor Covenant, I leave feeling great. I never thought I wanted to retire to Washington State. I wanted to go back to the Republic of Texas, but coming to Harbor Covenant is like almost beyond any doubt. Like, I want to retire to Washington. I want to retire to Gig Harbor in 4 or 5 years, never retire because of Harbor Covenant. I want to grow here as a Christian, as a follower, and I want my son to grow here. And I want my family to experience what Harbor Covenant has to offer, because it feels so at home here. I find myself like continuously volunteering for things here because it feels good, and doing like serving others and just helping. And that's why I want to continue to go to Harbor Covenant, and that's why I feel like Harbor Covenant's home.